Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update.
With a peaceful solution to the Doklam crisis in June, the world media, policymakers on both sides, India and China, start to seriously look at the issue of border control, particularly crisis management, since 1962. Now, we have many other interesting issues to debate and discuss. For example, what does the rapid economic expansion of China mean for the Indian Ocean, where we have growing stakes of maritime commerce? And is Indian Ocean viewed by the Indian military as their own backyard? What does the construction of a Djibouti military base mean for the Indian Navy? Now, it seems everything focuses on the issue of zero-sum game, whether we have the continuity of the Cold War. Today, we are honored to be joined here by Professor Zhu Chenghu with the PLA National Defense University and his Indian counterpart, Mr. Dipankar Banerjee, former director of the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies in India. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui.
The border disputes between India and China started in early 19th century. In 1914, Harry McMahon, the British Foreign Minister in India, made a private deal with local representative of Tibet. McMahon offered 5,000 guns and 500,000 bullets for a border agreement, the so-called McMahon Line. With this line, about 90,000 square kilometers in Tibet became the British colonial territory. No Chinese government has accepted that line. The Chinese-Indian border is 2,000 kilometers long, and about 120,000 square kilometers are disputed territory, which equals to half of Britain. From the 1950s, border conflicts have increased. A large-scale conflict occurred in 1962, but ended in Indian defeat.
Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. Looking back, what lessons can we draw from the Doklam chapter in June 2017? That's the most serious crisis, perhaps since 1962.
Yes, I think we can draw several lessons from this. One is that we have to be very careful along the border between our two countries. We must ensure that it remains peaceful and stable. Our political leaders over the years, especially the last three decades or so, have taken a decision on it. And we've got to implement measures in order to ensure that accidental conflict or tense situation, such as the one that erupted in Doklam, do not happen in the future.
What do you think of the crisis management by the two governments?
This is a very negative impact on the sentiments of the people of both countries. But I think several lessons should be learned from this standoff. One is that the two militaries are short of exchanges between them, especially between the border troops. This is one. Secondly, I think we are short of CBMs here. And the third one is that we are short of trust, strategic trust. So this is the demonstration of the shortage of both CBMs and the strategic trust. And the last one is that I think the soldiers of both sides will have to follow the decision of the top leaders. This is very important.
Fortunately, not a single bullet has been fired since 1962. What do you think of the border negotiations?
Well, the border negotiations have been going slow because of various reasons. We have had a large number of agreements between both countries to address issues regarding the border settlement, peace and tranquility under 1993 agreement. Subsequently, we worked out the guidelines through which we'll address the border and get it resolved. And we've also evolved a minimum confidence building, in the sense the behavior of troops along the line of control when they patrol in that area. But that is not enough. As the Doklam incident shows, that is not enough. More needs to be done.
Since 1962, China has been taken as the public enemy #1 by Indian troops. They have been prepared for a showdown, like something in Doklam, which was one step short of an open confrontation between two major militaries in Asia. So, do you think China has always been seduced by a sense of superiority since the 1962 border clash, and we were actually called ill-prepared for such a showdown. Therefore, China seems to have more lessons to sum up and to think about.
I think since 1962, we have tried our efforts to maintain peace and stability on the border by both sides. On the Chinese side, if you look at the deployment and the readiness of the forces, or posture of the forces in Tibet, you can find that China is not preparing a war or preparing a large-scale confrontation with India. China is not taking India as a very serious threat. But
is that an issue of arrogance, superiority, or do you think we didn't take India as a threat? I mean, what was at the back of the mind?
I think a lot of reasons contribute to the posture and the deployment of Chinese military in Tibet. Number one is that Chinese do not believe that India will launch large military offensive against China. This is one thing. Secondly, I think China needs peace and stability on its border very much because of its economic and social development. Without the peace and the stability on the border, it's impossible for China to realize this sort of objective. Third one is that in Tibet, it is very difficult for us to deploy great number of troops there. If you maintain one soldier in Tibet, the cost can be used to maintain 18 soldiers in inland. So that is not acceptable by the Chinese military if you look at the situation in the past because of the limited military expenditures in the past.
It's everybody's hunch towards the end of the standoff. That is because of the Xiamen BRICS summit that the Chinese authorities wanted to find a peaceful solution to the crisis in Doklam. How much do you think the political will on both sides has contributed most to a peaceful solution?
About China, the perception in India is not that China is weak in Tibet or the Chinese capability is less. Actually, it is the other way around, in the sense that the infrastructure that China has been able to construct in Tibet in order to support its forces, roads, railway lines, airfields, other logistics establishments, etc., is far exceeds that of Indian capability. And so therefore, there is a legitimate anxiety in that sense. Overall, of course, China has got a much larger defense budget and a larger armed forces. So there is that perception of, China is not weak in Tibet by any perception from the Indian side. And at the end, unfortunately, the 1962 perception continues to determine India's approach and policy. India sees the 1962 war as a betrayal and an offensive action by China, and that was something that was least expected. India was totally unprepared, and China launched an attack. We feel that was without provocation. That war need not have been fought. Just like the Doklam incident, it could have been also settled through dialogue and discussion subsequently. So therefore, that lingering suspicion also clouds the thinking of the Indian public as well as Indian decision makers. So that's what creates, exactly as General Xu mentioned, that lack of trust.
It seems, General Zhu, that the Indians and the Indian tabloid media are very much worried about the presence of the Chinese Navy in the Indian Ocean, despite the fact that China's flotilla escorts more of the international cargo, commerce than our domestic commerce in the Indian Ocean. But we always heard things like the Pearl theory along the coastline of the Indian Ocean. What do you think of the Indian concerns about our military build-up and the implications for the Indian Ocean?
Yeah, to some extent it's quite understandable. If we stand on the boats of Indians, it is because in the past the Chinese naval vessels had never been to Indian Ocean, or very seldom went to Indian Ocean in the past. But nowadays it's different because we are taking part in the escort operations in the framework of the United Nations. And secondly, China is becoming increasingly dependent on the resources from the Middle East and Africa. And we need to protect the safety and the security of the sea lanes of communication. And of course, we Chinese will never seek the unilateral protection. We mainly depend on the collective and the cooperative protection. If you look at the situation in Africa and the Indian Ocean, you will find that we will have some new challenges. Nowadays, in the United Nations, and especially between China and the United States, we are discussing the possibility of escort operations in the Bay of Guinea. And this is a long distance. It covers the coast of more than 6,000 kilometers. That's a very huge area. And if this sort of escort operations are launched, I think we Chinese will have to send some troops, send some warships to take part in this sort of operations. Of course, the Chinese Navy will be very willing to cooperate with India to protect the sea lanes of communication. Of course, during the standoff, we also heard some arguments from Indians that they can block the sea lanes of communication on the Indian Ocean. And this is something that Chinese are pretty much concerned about. Of course, I don't think it's an easy job. It's an easy job for any military because the Indian Ocean is so vast.
Whatever the peacemaking nature of China, for example, sending so many blue helmet troops to help maintain peace in many parts of the world, a lot of the media fanfare and nationalists in India are concerned about our first overseas military base in Djibouti. They say this is part of the conspiracy theory to encircle India. That sounds pretty ridiculous for the Chinese observers, but from the Indian perspective, do you think this will continue to work and undermine the mutual trust between our two countries?
China is an economic superpower. It's got the largest trade in the world. It's got genuine and major strategic interests in the Indian Ocean. Its communication routes go through that. And I think every country in the world, including India, recognizes that. Now the question of how you secure those interests, that is what is important. Now, you know, we had repeated assurance. By the way, on the protection against pirates, Indian Navy and the Chinese Navy have cooperated in the Persian Gulf area, and also to a limited extent in the Malacca Straits, limited cooperation there. And so there are joint operations that have gone on there, and there has been a fruitful exercise for both sides. So recognizing China's requirements and China's strategic interests in that area, we have to find ways of doing that. But if you are a regional country there, and in the littoral regions of the Indian Ocean region, sudden presence of Chinese naval ships create apprehensions, create concerns. And that's precisely, it's been a rapid increase of naval capabilities of China. It's likely to go not only Kenya, perhaps even further south. China's trade with African countries further south, and on the west coast of Africa, where the trade route will be along to the Cape of Good Hope, they also become very important. And so therefore, I think we have to find ways and means of doing this together, jointly, without creating apprehensions in the minds of those states who are there astride the Indian Ocean routes. This includes not just India in a significant sense, but of course Southeast Asian nations, also perhaps Sri Lanka and other countries, etc.
A thorny issue, if not a flashpoint potentially between India and China in South Asia, is terrorism. The Indians said over and over to me and to my program, look, Yang Rui, unless and until China cooperates with the UN Security Council in dealing with the issue of terrorism in this area, India will not fully support the idea of Belt and Road Initiative. What do you think of, say, our taking side with Pakistan has been viewed by India as very unfair, and that would serve to disrupt the healthy development of bilateral relationship, particularly male-to-male relationship between the two armies?
China's policy on terrorism is quite clear. China is against all forms of terrorist attacks. If you can show us evidence to prove that is done by the Pakistan government or supported by the Pakistan military, I don't think China has any reason to reject the request of the Indian government or Indian military.
But our friends in Islamabad were very unhappy about the issue of the joint statement towards the end of the BRICS summit in Xiamen, and this document covers issues of a Massoud and Akhani network. The Pakistani friends hardly concealed their disappointment. So do you think the Chinese authorities have to take into consideration the Pakistani understanding of the alleged terrorism?
To address this issue, the problems lies in the in between India and Pakistan. They have to increase their confidence and increase the trust between them. Otherwise, I think terrorist attacks will more frequently happen in these countries, including China.
Right, China wants to keep a distance from Kashmir and from the long-term geopolitical rivalry between India and Pakistan. Let's look at Myanmar.
Can I come back a little bit on this? Yeah, very sound points made by General Xu, and I agree with many of them. Firstly, on India's Look East policy, as you quite rightly said, it's got no strategic or security elements in it. It is purely an economic engagement attempt to engage Southeast Asia, Japan and Korea. For India, those economies, trade, commerce and relationship with them, investments in particular, are extremely important. And that is a thrust of the Look East policy. Now, on the question of counter-terrorism and the role of Pakistan, I think this is still an extremely important issue. All over the world, as you see from headlines appearing every now and then, terrorist attacks in Europe, USA are increasing. In India again. Unfortunately, the source of many of these extreme Islamic radicalism, terror support, now originates in Pakistan. Because of the long history, 30-40 years history of countering these, the way Pakistan unfortunately has got infected by terrorism, it has had deep roots within its this thing. Pakistan is a country, over 200 million people, have every right to advance, develop and prosper, and requires international support for it. But Pakistan must demonstrate a will and the ability to counter and stop all terrorist activities within it. If that does not happen, Pakistan today is outlawed by the West. No Pakistani can go to any of the Western countries. The SARC Secretary General is an active service, foreign service officer from Pakistan, was not allowed a visa to visit Singapore for an official conference, not an official conference, non-official SARC conference. China needs to pay a lot of attention to that. As a close friend of Pakistan, China needs to advise Pakistan more strongly to at least deal with the terrorists within. Not anything else. All the other aspects, if China feels like supporting Pakistan, it's most welcome to do it. And Pakistan needs support, help and support.
Yeah, General, I agree with you on a lot of points, but we will have to take into consideration several facts. One is that the terrorist origins are not from Pakistan. So I first went to Pakistan in 1986. When I was there, I was shocked by the order of the refugees from Afghanistan to the north of Peshawar. 3 million refugees were camped there, and they were in good order. But unfortunately, with the development of the war in Afghanistan, especially the war on terror against Afghanistan, a lot of Taliban elements spread to Afghanistan, to Pakistan. And the Talibans from both Afghanistan and Pakistan merged together. This is one fact. Secondly,
that's why former President of Pakistan, Musharraf, escaped from assassination attempts at least 3 times.
Yeah, that's right.
No, General, that's absolutely right.
Secondly,
absolutely.
Secondly, if we look at that, the United States has already launched the strikes against the basis of Taliban, basis of the Al-Qaeda in Pakistan. But I don't think that will help to solve the problem. Third one, the international society overestimated the capabilities of the central government of Pakistan and the capabilities of the military in Pakistan. To be very frank, they are the Taliban bases, Taliban organizations are actually out of the control. And I don't think the government and the military of Pakistan have the capability to control them. This is my understanding.
Oh, by the way, during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, Islamabad was very supportive of the Taliban, and the United States was also behind the support in driving out the Soviet troops. How do you say
the U.S. fought the war against the Soviet Union in Pakistan, involving the Pakistanis and destroying Pakistan in the process, including Afghanistan.
And in fact, many Pakistani politicians said to me, Ray, we have paid the heaviest political price for taking side with the United States in fighting terrorism. So when you said many of the terrorists or most of the terrorism came from Pakistan, the Pakistani people would definitely disagree with you, and they have their own bitter memories about the price they pay for being forced to take side with the United States after 9/11. But the last question is about Myanmar. Myanmar is the only member state of ASEAN to share land border with India, and when the crackdown took place against Rohingya refugees, the Chinese took side with the Myanmar government in condemning any violence there. What do you think of this incident from the Indian perspective?
It is an extremely sad incident and to be highly condemned. And the United Nations and its representatives in Myanmar have criticized the Myanmar government in no uncertain terms. It is a very unfortunate situation that has evolved in Myanmar now. Of course, the fault and the responsibility to rectify the situation is essentially lies in Myanmar, and the international community must put due pressure and provide adequate support to deal with the situation. Is it likely to happen? I don't think so. Myanmar government is not going to let go. If that happens, and the refugees in such number, probably 1 million, have already reached Bangladesh, it will destabilize Bangladesh very significantly. A very poor country which is looking up, developing economically very well, human development indices higher, per capita income, other things higher than Pakistan now they'll be hit very badly. So it's a very...
Very quickly, do you think the glowing image of Aung San Suu Kyi, leader of the National League of Democracy, will be undermined, sadly, because of the controversial handling of Rohingya?
In spite of her limitations, I think this has already happened. She is no longer that ideal democratic figure that had emerged in a very difficult country. World doesn't quite look at Aung San Suu Kyi like that anymore.
General Zhu, do you think the Chinese side is clearly aware of the Indian influence, the enormous Indian influence in Myanmar?
Yes, I know that the Indians' influence in Myanmar is increasing. And of course, with the increase of the United States, Japan, and others in Myanmar. So Myanmar it will be in a very, very difficult period of time, because I don't think the present leadership can control the situation. Therefore, I believe that this country will suffer quite a lot.
But do you think it will be a mistake to underestimate the PLA influence on the Myanmar military, given the history of the close cooperation between our two militaries?
Yes, we have some links between the PLA and the armed forces of Myanmar. But what we are doing and what we have done is to provide some weapons to this country, to the military of Myanmar. I don't think we have tremendous influence over the U.S. military.
And China sells weapons to many parts of the world.
Yes, of course. Myanmar is a little
industry.
bit different, not like India. Indian weapons are from different countries, while Myanmar weapons are mainly from China.
Well,
Even not a single piece from Western countries.
now
So
we
this
come
is the
to terms
effect.
with the huge benefits of the military-industrial complex, an idea that was first created by Eisenhower, former U.S. president, in the 1970s perhaps. With that, we come to the conclusion of this dialogue. We're addressing the issue of mil-to-mil ties between the two countries, and of course the most important issue of how to build trust since the chapter of Doklam in June this year. I'll see you next time.